This is the July meeting of the Fredericksburg chapter of the Native Plant Society of Texas. Tonight we have Rufus Stephens speaking to us about how native plants attract native birds. Thank you, Rufus.
So that's the cover of the book, Red-Shouldered Hawk. And the big thing is, while it's called Attracting Birds in the Texas Hill Country, the subtitle is what's really important. It's a guide to land stewardship. It's about being land stewards. And we, through our book, really want you to be better land stewards. And that's our goal. Anybody know Ann Adams from the Bernie chapter of the Native Plant Society? And her husband, Gary. So what are some of the steps to good to stewardship for birds? First is identify your habitats that you have and the different types and the quality. So y'all probably have already done that on your properties. And so, but I want you to think about habitat. That's really what I want y'all to focus in as native plant people. And then you select your target species. And usually what we recommend is 2 to 3 species for each habitat type. And they become your measure for the quality of that habitat, okay, following those birds. And then you use that to determine the stewardship practices. And I'll show you some examples of that. So why birds? Well, birds are charismatic and people love birds. And they also represent diversity. When we talk about, native habitat diversity, native bird diversity just goes right hand in hand with that. They also can easily benefit from habitat improvements. When birds flourish, all other wildlife flourish, and native habitats flourish. So, anybody have that bird? So let me see hands. Stick up hands. Look how many people, okay? And you kind of think, we're right in the heart of painted bunting habitat, really, in this part of Texas. Really, from here up into southern Oklahoma, that's really the center of painted bunting habitat. And everybody wants this bird, right? Everybody wants to have this bird. But one of the things about even birds that we think of as very common is they need our help. And one of the things that we were really surprised about I knew it in the back of my mind, but when we started selecting birds for the different habitats and developing a list, more than half of the birds we selected were considered priority. And that means that they're declining or they're on some type of watch list by somebody, either Partners in Flight or breeding bird surveys or Texas Parks and Wildlife. Someone says they're in trouble. And this is the population for painted buntings in the Everett's Plateau over the past, since basically from the late 70s. There actually was a publication done just about 2 years ago. And it was talking about, and it was published in Science, and it was talking about bird decline. And actually, these guys right here, those are the authors of this article that was in Science. A bunch of these guys, they're from Patuxent Wildlife Research Center. And so they do the breeding bird survey stuff. But they looked at a lot of different data. And basically what they came up with was about 70% of bird populations have declined, and some of them really significantly. And it's not just the ones that you would imagine, okay? Common birds were declining. And so it's really quite distressing. And there's a whole number of reasons why that's occurring. For the painted bunting, one of the things about painted buntings are very susceptible to cowbird parasitism. And so cowbirds go over, lay their eggs and kick out the eggs from the painted bunting, and the painted bunting will end up raising the young of the cowbirds. And so we know that's part of the real diverse thing that's going on, but also climate change, the impact on our climate, but loss of habitat, loss of quality of habitat. So there's a lot of things going on there. There is one really bright spot in that research, which was that waterfowl had actually increased since the 70s. So, well, why is that? Well, one of the reasons is there's a thing called the North American Waterfowl Management Plan. Anybody who's a waterfowl hunter or has been a waterfowl hunter, lots of people, when you're young and you're willing to go out in the cold and the wet and go duck hunting, you're probably not anymore. So, but your duck stamps, that was a big part of it. Okay, that helped fund it. And they created the North American Waterfowl Management Plan, and they were focused on managing habitat for those species. So we can, through policy, change those things and change it. But also, there are things that we can do. We can all manage for painted buntings. And when we take up and tally up all the acreage that we have here, or all the acreage that's under wildlife tax valuation in Gillespie County, then there's a significant impact that can be made by people with doing focused management. So one of the things that we suggest is be prepared to be your own best advisor. Look and listen, ask lots of questions, keep learning. That's part of y'all being here tonight, right? Find trusted advisors. Jan will always say, well, I was one of her trusted advisors. But is also realizing what different advisors can provide information to you and what are their biases. My bias is wildlife management. I care about wildlife. And I'm not a production agriculture, I know about it, but that's not my thing. Okay. Sheep and goats. Yeah, I'm not, that's not my thing. Understand. So like, if you have someone with NRCS as an advisor, just understand their bias. They tend to focus on production agriculture, okay? But they have tremendous knowledge about plant communities, tremendous knowledge about how those plant communities grow on different soils. So they're really a really good resource. Texas Forest Service, great resource. Their focus is trees, though. Right, so they kind of are in tunnel vision outside of trees and fires, and also make science-based decisions. Okay, so one of the things is, basically, so wildlife habitat. Bird habitat is the same as wildlife habitat, and what that habitat is food, water, shelter, and space. And space is often kind of a funny one because it relates to, it's different for different species. So a deer mouse has much smaller space requirements than does a buffalo. Okay, just the amount of area the buffalo has to roam over in order to get everything it needs to get food, water, and shelter is dramatically larger than a deer mouse. So, and basically habitats where they get everything they need to eat and breed and nest and find protection. So just talking a little bit about the chapters, and one of the things, again, to think about, this is really more of a habitat management book. Birds are the hook to get people involved, but it's about managing habitat. It's about managing native plant communities. And that is one thing I want you to think about. Rather than thinking about individual plants, just think about plant communities, okay? And so the first chapter is wooded slopes and savannas. It includes a bunch of our woodlands, dry wooded slopes, moist wooded slopes, post oak savanna, shin oak savanna, and live oak savanna, which is, the dominant savanna type in the hill country. Grasslands, and there are different types. If you think of plateau grasslands, that's like up on the divide between Kerrville or on the tops of hills, but especially going from Kerrville to Rock Springs, that high dry country up there and on the divide, that's a plateau grasslands. Rivers and creeks, canyons, seeps, and springs, tanks, ponds, and lakes, and so those are man-made things, right? We really don't have any lakes, right? We have impoundments. They're all man-made. Backyards. So that's the first 6 chapters. Then we have one on predators and other dangerous animals. Deer management. You can't talk about plants and plant community and trying to manage for wildlife in the hill country without talking about deer. And then cedar, which actually our book is about to go out of print, the first edition. And actually we're working on the second edition right now with the editors. And but it's going to take a while because it has to go on a slow boat to China and actually come back on a slow boat from China. So it takes a while, and with the pandemic. And so one of the things I was going to talk about, one of the first habitat types I'm going to talk about is riparian habitat. That's streamside habitat. So if you look at streamside habitat and you kind of go, what are some of those kind of iconic things? When you go, even just looking out across the landscape at a distance, you see bald cypress, you see American sycamore, there's a creek there, right? And in that creek, you find some of these plants that like wetter conditions, right? Buttonbush, American beautyberry, such as that. Eastern gamma grass, about the main place it likes to grow in the hill country is along creeks and streams, and even small kind of creeks and stuff like that. I mean, even what we might think of as kind of a drainage. And then a variety of forbs or wildflowers. So kind of thinking about that as a plant community. And if in that plant community, one of the birds that is a priority bird is the summer tanager. And if you don't know the summer tanager, you probably have missed it because you thought it was a pardon, right? It zipped by and it looked red. They are really neat birds. They need about, one of the things that's important in our book is that we talk about the territory or the home range size and the requirements for a different species. So for this species, it's about 20 to 27 acres per nesting pair. And they eat insects and mainly things like bees and wasps. Okay, bees are your friends, but they also eat tent caterpillars and stuff like that. So they'll take wasps and then beat them against a tree branch and hornets and stuff, and then beat them against a tree branch and then eat them. So what you do from a management perspective, I mean, one of the things is control deer and cedar. That's really a big issue in riparian areas and streamside habitat, is that they're overgrazed and they're overbrowsed by deer. They are some of the best, most productive habitat that we have. Okay, we have more different kinds of birds, more different kinds of plants that are associated with riparian habitats or very close to it than you will find almost any place else. And but that also means because of that, deer really like it. So the deer density we talk about as biologists that talk about deer management is that deer aren't the same number evenly across the landscape. You go out in a grassland area, there aren't very many deer. You go down by the creek, there's a bunch of deer. You go into a cedar break, there aren't very many deer. So the quality of the habitat depends a lot on how many deer you'll have in that. So the highest deer densities we have is in riparian habitats. Actually, there was a study done by some students, a graduate student out of Texas State, and they looked at pecan reproduction in bottoms all across the hill country and found that there was basically zero. zero pecan recruitment, okay, because for new trees, because of the deer populations, and partially because they like that especially. So what about grasslands? And what kind of habitat? So, if you think of it, little blue stem, silver blue stem, green spangle top, Southwest bristlegrass grape has a fairly large seed there, but people know, y'all know Southwest bristlegrass. So it looks kind of like a squirrel tail, is kind of one way to describe it. And it has a pretty big seed, and Painted Buntings love it, mainly because it's a grass seed that's fairly large of all the grass seeds. And Painted Buntings do love grass seeds. Of course, big blue stem. I was at the Cibolo Preserve, which is next door to, that's where I got the plants today. It's just next door to the Cibolo Nature Center, and a great big blue stem stand over there in a bottom area that had never been farmed. And so it's really pretty incredible. And this is a great year, right? I mean, it's going to be a great Indian grass year. Already got lots of Indian grass. And for grasslands, one of the birds that we look at is the lesser goldfinch. Anybody got lesser goldfinches, feeding lesser goldfinches? And, while I say grasslands, and for some of these birds, I mean, the summer tanager is much more associated with the riparian area, but you'll find them in some upland settings or away from a stream setting, where these guys, they really like grasslands, and that may be their preferred habitat. But you'll also find them in a lot of different places, including backyards. We live a block from HEB in Bernie, a block off Main Street, and we've got a bunch of lesser goldfinches. This is also a bird that has dramatically declined. Okay, even though we still have lots of them around, it's dramatically declined. 7 to 15 acres per pair. Insects and plant diversity is really important to them. Some perch for hunting. They are big on seeds, right? So anybody feed thistle seed? And take a look, as this is a pretty good annual sunflower year. As the annual sunflower matures, break it open, take it, look at the size of those seeds. That's almost the exact same thing as thistle seed. That's really that's the native. You kind of go, okay, well, it's like thistle seed besides thistle. But that annual sunflower has that real small seed that they really like. Post oak savanna. Anybody got post oak savanna? There's a lot of post oak savanna in Gillespie County, and actually probably more than there is in all the rest of the hill country. Most of the post oak savanna tend to be fairly deep soil, so they tended to the early European settlers tend to cut all those trees down, build cabins out of them or barns, and farm it. So there's not much post oak woodlands left. Post oaks, blackjack oaks, hackberries, my favorite tree. Things like coral honeysuckle, Texas persimmon and shrubs, grasses, big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass. Forbs, bush, Eagleman daisy, sensitive briar, straggler daisy. Straggler daisy, everybody knows that, right? It kind of likes a little bit of shade, so it does better in savanna. Well, what's a bird associated with that? Another priority bird. I mean, you may think, well, ladderbacks, there's lots of ladderbacks around. They are a priority bird as well and have seen a decline. About 16 acres per green pair or more. They like large trees. One of the things is keeping snags. They like standing dead trees, which biologists call snags. So as a habitat management practice, maintaining, there it is, keeping those standing dead trees is important. Okay. A lot of post oaks in 2011, 2012. We got hypoxylon, and a bunch of them died. Right. And so one of the things is don't cut them all down. Okay. Leave them. They actually, having lots of woodpeckers is really good for forest health because they eat lots of insects. They eat the insects that cause diseases in trees. Okay. It's an important part of that ecosystem. This is something I wanted to show you. So just showing you how associated certain birds can be with particular habitats. So this is the Cibolo Nature Center, and this is kind of riparian habitat, and this going that way and back this way, and this is grassland habitat here, and this is grassland habitat here, and this is for white-eyed vireos. And white-eyed vireos, look at this. I mean, we've got, this is 15 years, I think, of data, of point count data. And basically those red circles are 100 yards. That's what those points, the bird observers are counting that area. The only reason this riparian area right here is missing and not colored or covered up is because there's not a point there. So there are birds there. It's just, we just don't happen to have a point there. But you can just really see how they do not use the grasslands. They are a woodland bird, right? So it's interesting how a particular habitat type can really be associated with a particular bird. So what are some of the plants that are characteristic about backyards? Plateau live oak and St. Augustine. No, seriously. So what we can think of is, like I said, live oak savanna is very much the dominant habitat type. And if you think of our yards, backyards, that's really what they are. We really are imitating, even if it was a grassland or an old field at one point, we're going to plant trees on it, and it's going to end up being more of a savanna type habitat. So if you think of a live oak savanna and some of the plants associated with that plant community, those are the kinds of things that we could add to our yard to make them better habitat. Okay. And so you can kind of see in this yard, pretty diverse yard, lots of flowering perennials and annuals and shrubs and layers. Layers of habitat, really important, different layers. And so this one is, so the bird for this one is the black-crested titmice. Anybody who doesn't have black-crested titmice? Okay, so it is also a priority bird. So what the heck? Well, actually, black-crested titmice are pretty much a hill country bird. 50% of the population is in the hill country. What we do and how we manage habitats for this bird is significant. It's most of them are here. Okay, so that's why it's been classified as a priority bird. It's fairly stable in its population, but it's also pretty restricted. Okay, so it's not as widespread as other titmice. Okay, so about 10 acres per nesting pair. So if you've got a 40-acre place, you could expect 4 pairs, and their cavity is 3 to 23 feet off the ground. That's the kind of area they're going to use. Those standing dead trees that the woodpeckers are drilling holes in are the native habitat for where they're going to make their nests. Okay, you can put up nest boxes for them, and they'll readily use nest boxes. Anybody doing bluebirds? Anybody got bluebird boxes out there? A couple, maybe. You'll get bluebirds, tufted titmice, wrens, Carolina chickadees. All will fit and use a bluebird box. Okay, so keep cats indoors. We're going to get to that here in a second. And actually, you'll see deer, controlling deer, control deer, control deer, control deer is really important. So I already kind of mentioned this, was about that in a particular species, just because we talk about it from and sort of focus on it in a particular habitat type, like live oak savannas for the painted bunting. They occur in post oak savannas. They occur in riparian areas. They occur in, a whole variety. People have them in their backyards. Not as many as they do in rural settings, but they do. And so keep in mind, there is a wide variety of habitats that these birds may use, even though they may prefer, so savanna type habitats are really the preference for this species, for painted buntings. And actually that one kind of looks funny. It's because it's all puffed up after just taking a bath. He's kind of all fluffed up. But painted buntings are, those variety of habitats, I mean, it can occur there. Any kind of savanna habitat, post oak savanna, live oak savanna, shin oak savanna, all good habitat types. Anybody been to the Kerr Wildlife Management Area? Great native plants there because their deer density is pretty low. So they have really a good native plant diversity, but they also have a wonderful bird diversity. Painted buntings out the wazoo, and where their black-hat vireos are, the shin oak savannas that they have, there's tons of painted buntings there as well. And so one of the things is their average nesting height is 3.5 feet off the ground. Okay, how high is the browse line for deer? So they're an open cup nest, right? They build a nest like cardinals do and stuff. So they build a typical bird nest, open cup nest. But 3.5 feet is their preference. When we have high deer populations and they are making a browse line, then that is impacting this bird's habitat. It doesn't have that habitat available to them. So I already mentioned about cowbirds being a problem. RIFA, red imported fire ants. I'm sorry, I probably showed that several times, but RIFA, red imported fire ants. Any bird that utilizes insects, almost all of our birds, with a few exceptions, doves do not. Doves produce crop milk to feed to their young, but almost all the other birds, even ones that we think like cardinals that are really that we think of exclusively seed eaters, are eating insects and feeding their young insects in the spring. High energy food source, super important. The big problem to high insect diversities, red imported fire ants. Okay, they are super competitive. They reduce insect diversity. We know there's been research that's been done. Where they are prolific, they outcompete and kill other insects, right? But you want to be careful about killing ants. This is a sidetrack here about killing ants. Not all ants are bad. There are probably 50 species of ants that occur in this county, and only one of them is a red imported fire ant, and all the others can have very beneficial and be very important. Flickers eat ants. They'll go to ant piles and eat them. Horned lizards, harvester ants, their food source. But there's an ant that makes in sidewalks. It makes little volcanoes look like this big, they're little bitty ant, and they won't bite you if you pick them up. If you happen to smash one, they smell just like blue cheese. So they call them the blue cheese ants. If you look at those little volcanoes, if there are any fire ants in the area, there'll be little dead bodies of fire ants around it. They are a fierce competitor with fire ants. They are one of the few ants that will actually kill fire ants. So they're cool, little bitty. And they're kind of red. They're not a sugar ant, which is like black. So no. So instead of it looking like a volcano pit or a crater, it's up. It stands proud, and they come out the top. What they do is they pull out stuff when they're making their burrows, and they pile it up, real fine material on the outside. Always see them in sidewalks and stuff like that. They're very cool. Or driveways, caliche roads, stuff like that. So our mystery plants. Anybody want to hazard a guess? How about let's start with this one? Frog fruit, right? That's frog fruit. What about this one? Anybody want to hazard a guess? Excuse me? Yeah, so spike rush. Spike rush is what Eleochris is the genus, Eleochris. And very fine, very fine. There are a lot of different types of spike rushes. And so actually, we've got one flowering plant, one rush, and then a grass. Anybody know that one? Excuse me? So Arapaho Arapaho muley or a paraho muley or a paraho grass is what it is. It's a muley grass, a Muhlenbergia, and super. And so anybody want to guess the habitat type that these are all associated with? Yeah. Wet spots, seats. Always think of seats. If I run into this grass any time of the year, there can be a drought. If I find this growing on the ground, or I find dead spike rush, I know that at some point that place is saturated. Okay, it was very wet. So there are some categories that wetland biologists use, and it's obligate, facultative wet, facultative upland, and upland plants. And so this spike rush is an obligate, means that it's almost always found with its feet wet. And that's almost true of all the spike rushes. There are a few exceptions. Some of them are facultative wet. This muley is almost always kind of like seat muley or Lindheimer's muley, and thinking of it as always being a seep around it, facultative wet. The frog fruit, actually, when I was doing wetland identification in western Kansas as part of the Fly Lakes joint venture, which was part of the North American Waterfowl Management Plan, that's when I realized that frog fruit was characteristic of wetland habitats. And so we would find that, and that's a 16-inch rainfall zone. I mean, so it's really, really dry. And so facultative wet or facultative. And so to kind of give you a little bit about that, here is these wetland indicators. Obligate almost always occurs in wetland. Facultative wet, usually occurring in wetlands, but can occur in not wetland situations. Then you have facultative. So anything that's facultative to obligate is our hydrophytes. And so the facultative upland means that it's usually an upland habitat. And so it's almost never an indicator of wetland. So this is an interesting thing. So those plants right there are clearly an indicator of a wet situation. And it looks like this, right? Right? Lindheimer's muley growing in there, and probably some bushy bluestem, but I don't see it. Some little bluestem growing around the edges, but certainly a lot of Lindheimer's muley. You can't see it that well, but this real fine green that's growing almost down right at the ground level, that's spike rush. Okay, it has a very fine green look right now. If it gets much drier later in the summer, it's going to look dead, but right now, I mean, with all the rain that we've had, it is very lush, but it's way down. I mean, it's only this tall. And so, and there's probably a parahomule in there, and you just can't see it. It's too small. So what's the kind of bird that would use sheep habitat? Well, this is LeConte sparrow. Doesn't breed here. It spends its winters here. One of the things, it's also a priority bird, mainly because of, or they think because of their nesting grounds. But they're also finding out, biologists are finding out that birds that are in decline, if they're migratory, it may be where they winter that's really critical to them, where they form pair bonds and such as that. So just to kind of move on, the subsequent chapter is the one about dangerous animals. That's things like red imported fire ants, cats, sparrowhogs, cowbirds. That's chapter 7. Deer management, that's chapter 8. Cedar management, that's chapter 9. Some of those, dangerous critters, there they are. We put the no sign through them. One of them is cats. I grew up with cats. I mean, my pet when I was a kid was cat, and a killer, BBC, big black cat. BBC was a tremendous killer, but bring rabbits and birds home and all kinds of stuff. This is a work by an artist in the San Antonio area, Joy Fisher-Hine. Anybody knows Master Naturalist program? She was a master naturalist. And she titled it Silent Spring 4,000,000,001 and counting. And what she means is that actually house cats kill between 2 and 4 billion songbirds every year. Okay, that's more than all other predators combined, mammalian predators combined. So keep your cat indoors, spay and neuter your pet. If you really got to have them, let them outside. Get a catio. A catio, it's completely enclosed space for the cats to go out and hang out outside. You may think that a bell will help. It's just the last thing the bird hears before it gets nailed. Right? They actually learn to hunt by not ringing the bell. They're just more stealthy, so it doesn't ring. Brown-headed cowbirds, already mentioned. Here are highly parasitized birds by them. There's our painted buntings, summer tanager, northern cardinal, dick thistle, which is a grassland bird, black-cap vireo. Big part of the management at the Kerr Wildlife Management Area has been managing for not only the habitat, but for controlling brown-headed cowbirds. They are at a peak of those these days. Trap and euthanize them. You can. One of the things is cowbirds are an edge bird. So if you have woodland, dense woodland, a larger block, don't open it up. The larger the block, the better it is. So if you start cutting little meadows into it, you're making it more susceptible, those birds that nest in that area, more susceptible to brown-headed cowbirds. Brown-headed cowbirds don't like to go to interior woodlands. About 100 yards. Deer population. There you go. That's what happened. The deer population took off in the late 60s and 70s, and we could just draw this graph out, and it just oscillates around up here at about 4 million deer in the state of Texas, and it's not for a lack of having lots of opportunity to be able to shoot deer. So one of the things is, some of the signs, basically, they prefer forbs and browse plants. So do you have an abundance of those? Low-growing branches, painted bunting habitat, saplings for the preferred plants. Hackberries just don't reproduce like they should, because and think about where you find them. In fence lines, you have a cage somehow, it grows in the cage. Those are the places that you're seeing hackberries. It's not out in open settings. Carolina buckthorns also, Spanish oaks, plums are all highly preferred by deer. Be part of the solution. Don't feed them. Don't feed exotics. Consider being a conservation hunter, not a trophy hunter. Conservation hunter means that you're trying to manage the deer population to benefit the habitat and do things like feed the hungry. Unfortunately, even through the pandemic, so much hunger. Food banks and food pantries have just been overwhelmed, and protein sources of protein are often a problem for them. So there's hunters for the hungry. You can donate meat to them. So feeding the hungry is an important thing for it. It's also a heart healthy. If you want to be a local war, right? Eating locally, eating deer is really good. Harvest does. That's the problem. Not shooting bucks, harvesting does. Sorry, ladies, but that's what we have most of, and also that's the breeding side of the population. If you want to control the population, you need to do that. Forget contraceptives; they just don't work. Be a conservation gardener. Y'all probably are. Use cages. I wanted to show you. This is kind of like there's a landowner that I have who had a shin oak savanna on top of a hill that's completely covered in cedar, and I told him about it, and he went, well, and I said, you can just cut some of the cedar and just stack it and make little corrals. And he went, oh, okay. And he says that's his exercise, is he cuts cedar and he stacks it into a kind of a windrow and makes a fence out of it. And he started with small, half the size of this room type exclosures with cedar around it. And he said, one of the things is you want to be sure that you can add some cedar, so you don't want to cut too much of the cedar that's right next to where you're stacking cedar. So there's a little bit of planning going on, but he got to where he had some of his exclosures were like 5 acres in size. And shin oak, native plants, there was like 3 species. There was cedar sedge, cedar, and almost dead shin oak. And after he did this, dozens and dozens of native plants, really spectacular. I was trying to dig up that picture earlier. I couldn't find it. But some of the plants to really focus on, things like Carolina buckthorn, hawthorns, escarpment black cherry. Oh, I've got a great one where there's just a fence, fewer deer on this side, more deer on that side. Tons of seedlings over here, none over there. Just so stark that it's clear what's going on. Mulberries, Virginia creeper, they're all Carolina, rusty blackall, blanco crab. Some of the dangerous plants to watch out for, y'all know these: Johnson grass, bastard cabbage, KR blue stem, ligustrum, chinaberry, Chinese tallow. They decrease habitat diversity for birds and others. One of the things with cedar, think about there's places where cedar is probably healthy in the most stable plant community. So one of the things is plan when you clear cedar. Really be very, because there's some cedar you want to leave. Robin sedum, cedar waxwings, wood houses, scrub jay, they is especially associated with that type of habitat. So the steps to stewardship for birds is identify the different habitats and the quality of it. So how diverse is it? So that you have a diversity of species of birds. Identify the species that you want to manage for. And so that way you can look like the painted bunting and knowing that you need to manage that deer population because you're impacting their habitat by having too many deer. And then determine what those stewardship practices are. This is really what helps you kind of evaluate. You go look at the habitat and you go, oh, okay, this is what those birds need. It can really help guide you to be a better steward.